Hello and welcome to the FIT4PRIVACY Podcast, the podcast for those who care about privacy. I'm your host Punit, and here we have conversations with industry leaders about their perspectives, ideas and opinions relating to privacy and data protection matters. Before we start, a quick disclaimer that the views and opinions expressed are not legal advice. So let's get started. Hello and welcome. Today we have a very special and unique guest. Today we have a special and unique guest who is the CEO and founder of True Staffing Partners. So we promised that in season 2 we will bring different people, different backgrounds, and today we bring to you an award-winning staffing company that helps in placements in data privacy, e-discovery, and cybersecurity, and not since the GDPR came, but since 2010. So it's well known for placing over 3,000 people. If you're looking for a job or a change, you may be in to contact True Staffing, but I'm talking about their CEO, Jared Coseglia. Jared, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's an honor to be here. I appreciate it. Thank you.
So you started to help people in privacy placements as early as 2010. So how did you get into this privacy field?
Yeah, I came to it through e-discovery, actually. In the early stages of my career prior to starting True Staffing Partners, I worked almost exclusively in e-discovery. And e-discovery is way downstream or way right in the information governance lifecycle as it relates to data, and it's a journey through this world to eventual potential litigation or investigation. And so it became clear to me that around 2011, 2012, privacy was now becoming a concern that everybody had to deal with, and they were dealing with it as far downstream as e-discovery. So like a good e-discovery practitioner, I was looking to move further left in the process, right? The further you move left with your clients, the further you move towards the origination of data and the original holders of data, the more opportunity you have to influence what happens to that data and all the talent that supports the management and massaging of that data downstream. So it was just an organic, really, matriculation further left from discovery to governance to privacy and security, and that sticky intersection between what we'll call legal and technology has been what I'm most interested and passionate about. And really, at a broad level, if I had to use one word to describe the kind of opportunities and people I represent, it would be that legal, tech, and privacy. I think falls squarely in that segmentation.
Exactly, right in the middle. So no wonder your company is voted 7 times the top 3 legal and litigation staffing company. It's amazing the work you're doing. So how would you put GDPR in one word? I know it's complex and challenging, but how would you describe it in one word?
I'll give you 2.
Yeah, that I'll take 2.
Talent surge. The 6 to 12 months leading up to GDPR in May of 18 was the biggest surge in demand for privacy talent that we've seen until the last 6 months, which have been bonanzas. And that's because a lot of companies really didn't know how to deal with it. And there was staffing happening across all sorts of different segmentations. The consulting firms had a huge piece of the pie because a lot of these companies hadn't built programmatic solutions within their own house yet. And so they were leaning heavily on external resources. Now, meanwhile, more mature companies had been building these or were in the process of building these. So a massive surge in chief privacy officer staffing, and then eventually director and manager level staffing underneath as corporations began to build programs. Also, at that same time, outside counsel was being leveraged so much for things that now are often done in-house as part of companies' programs that the law firms, AmLaw 200, were hiring, Magic Circle firms were hiring in volumes and droves, preparing for GDPR. What's interesting, and I think, my perspective might be unique to some of your viewers, is that I'm watching most of this happen in the United States. And the way the United States deals with privacy is very different than how Europe in particular deals with privacy at a very core esoteric level, it's very different. And we can get into that later because it is fascinating. But from a staffing perspective, which is what I'm most focused on, we didn't see a talent surge in Europe. And it was kind of, slowly building over the years. And we didn't see the kind of spike that we did at GDPR that we did here in the States. Now, was that because United States companies were just far more underprepared? Maybe a little bit, but the real dynamic is GDPR forced American companies to examine how privacy was more than just compliance, but an opportunity. And companies are now increasingly hiring more talent into their privacy departments, not in compliance functions, but in working with the business. Right. And using privacy, not just fundamentally at a legal level, but as a means to drive business forward and win customer trust. And we began to see that surge around GDPR here in the States.
Yeah. So you've seen the journey or the evolution of privacy job market from 2010 to 16 and then from 16 to 20. How do you see this evolving going forward? Because some people say, and of course they are the naysayers, and they say, well, the GDPR is done and there will be no more demand. You and me know that it won't be the case. There will remain demand for good people, knowledgeable people. Some of the people did get a good job in the 2018 phase, but the good people will always remain in demand. So how do you see this evolution going forward 5 years? Because you're also seeing new laws in US and everywhere.
Yeah, so I'll answer that at 100,000 feet and say, I look at what happened yesterday when Microsoft made its second largest acquisition in company history of a company called Nuance. And this is an AI company that is focused on healthcare data.
Yeah.
And when you think about who's going to be in control of our data and what will drive the use of it, you're talking about two things: power and privacy.
Yeah.
And with that second pillar being so instrumental to the future growth of businesses, I think you're going to actually see privacy begin to have the kind of demand that we've seen from cybersecurity over the last decade, and hopefully not the shortage and drought that we've also seen from cybersecurity over the last decade. Privacy, unlike some of the cybersecurity arts, isn't something you have to or even necessarily can go get a bachelor's or master's degree in. There are some exceptions to that rule, but it is something that is learned quickly, learned on the job, can be a partial part of your job that then becomes a full part of your job. But I wouldn't be in this business if I didn't think privacy was going to be huge in terms of the talent needed to participate in having really mature privacy programs throughout both the Fortune 1000 and beyond. And what's great about where we are right now is, there are mature programs in those top 1,000 companies, but there are hundreds of thousands of other companies that aren't even addressing this yet.
Yep.
And as that changes and this becomes as rote as having firewalls, and then the awakening occurs within more corporations that this isn't just about having great firewalls, right? This is about communicating with customers about values and driving revenue. You're going to see a lot more people wielding privacy inside businesses.
Indeed, there's always a shortage of privacy people who understand business, comprehend business, and guide business. But is there a preference for hiring internals versus hiring externals or consultants? Do you see a bias at the moment?
Well, look, the bias right now is a result of the pandemic. And what we've seen from a staffing perspective, and I can only speak from a staffing perspective because that's what I know intimately, is the amount of jobs open at consulting firms has plummeted. The amount of people leaving consulting firms has increased exponentially in the last 18 months. And that's because, when people are not spending money, they're not spending it on consulting firms. Now, that's not to say consulting firms are in trouble. They've got plenty of business. But I think they were on such a growth trajectory coming into and out of GDPR that this put the brakes on a lot of that business. Also, what's happening kind of in conjunction with that is a commitment from more corporations to build their own programmatic resources in-house. So instead of leaning on consulting firms for a lot of things like, handle all our DSAR requests. That operation is being built internally. And so there's not a need for some of the more operational, tactical, technical things that are happening. Now, look, there are exceptions to that rule. Companies are bringing in enterprise technology like OneTrust, which was named the fastest growing company in America during the pandemic year, which is awesome, right? It just goes to show you that like the one thing that survived in the pandemic was privacy.
Right.
I mean, literally, and not just survived, but,
flourished.
Yeah, flourished. It was, fuel on the fire. People ask me, was your business, staffing businesses, obviously people aren't hiring during the pandemic, were you really affected? And the answer was, well, we were affected, but not really affected. And that's because privacy stayed strong. Compliance jobs and privacy jobs stayed strong through the pandemic. People continued to build these programs. So I think that you're going to continue to see more in corporate. I'd say about 80% of the job market right now is in corporate. And I'd say the other 20% is evenly split between AmLaw and consulting firms.
Yeah. And when companies are hiring, these corporates are hiring, do they prefer having people on their payroll, or do they prefer hiring people to scale up some demand and have some freelancers in there?
Yeah, the answer is both. And the answer to your previous question too, which I didn't answer in terms of internal promotions or hiring from externally, the answer is both there too. I think what a lot of companies have done leading up to GDPR is have partial resources in human resources, in IT, in marketing, where privacy and the program was a piece of their job. Some of those people are being sucked in and seconded into full-time privacy professionals, but not entirely. Most of the market is still out there acquiring talent from other companies to come in who are holistically privacy professionals, have their certifications, have been a part of building or growing or establishing programs. But when it comes to full-time versus contract resources, it's pretty 50-50 right now. I would say about half the job orders we get are full-time jobs. The other half are contract resources. But keep in mind, there's not a lot of contract executive level hiring in privacy. People are investing in full-time resources at a privacy director or privacy officer level. And right now, most of the privacy market in the United States is still at that 7 to 10 year level. There's a great survey that was put out by lawsource.net, and that's where most of the jobs are, 7 to 10 years, with like 2 to 5 slowly rising, but 0 to 2 very low. And the reason for that is because people are still building. People are also recalibrating post-pandemic what kind of top-down leadership they require in this new era. And that led to a lot of chief privacy officer search last year that we didn't anticipate, that quite frankly, I don't think would have happened had there not been a pandemic. So it was certainly an impetus for more hiring at an executive level. Now, those executives don't come on board and have endless headcount, particularly endless headcount for full-time employees, but they still have projects and they still have pieces of the program that need to get executed on. And that's where contract resources have come in. And look, contracting is a great way to get into a Fortune 1000 company. Some of the biggest and best, FANG stock companies are, cyclical hirers of contract resources. So you want to go work for a logo that, you can brag about at Thanksgiving dinner. Sometimes the only way you can get in is through a contract. Most of these contracts are perpetual. Some of them have finiteness to it, but usually that going in. But ones where there are endless amounts of problems, there's usually endless amounts of billable hours. Others where, they have a specific need, like, hey, we're doing a OneTrust installation. We need additional resources. You can help with some data migration. Okay, that's going to have a temporal window. But there are so many people that have that need in particular that, our contractors go from one corporation to another, assisting them, getting better at it as they go, and getting to sample and flavor different programs throughout the corporate ecosystem. And for particularly young, and I mean not in age, but in their career in privacy young professionals, that's often a great way to bootstrap your career and hyper accelerate what you're exposed to, people that you get to learn from, diversity of mentorship, diversity of culture, and all of these different things really make a strong privacy professional. Sometimes it's very difficult for people who've only done privacy at one company in one way to get jobs in other verticals. So contracting can be a way to break that up, and people are hiring contractors as much as they're hiring full-time employees.
Great. And is that demand region-centric? I know we are working from remotely and most of the things are remote, but is that region-centric demand, or is that all across the globe? Because I think True Staffing also, you have multiple offices and operate in multiple locations.
That's correct. I mean, we do staffing in, over 100 countries. So, the nuance from continent to continent is pretty specific. I think the demand in the United States is a lot higher than the demand in other areas, generally speaking, because we're weaponizing privacy over here, right? Privacy here is about, consumer rights, not human rights. And that distinction drives a lot of hiring as we continue to, for better or for worse, look at privacy through the lens of capitalism.
Yep, I see.
So that means more jobs, which, I'm an American, I'm a capitalist, and I love it. I support it. And I think it's great because privacy is a human right. And even if we don't treat it that way legally right now here in the United States, there are enough practitioners here that feel that way about it, that are driving core agendas and values that are the right core values for how companies should be thinking about their data. In terms of hotspots, the pandemic, if you'd asked me that question before the pandemic, I would have given you a very different answer. But it's been a revolution, right? So think of it this way. Before the pandemic, my companies in Cambridge, Massachusetts needed to have their employees in Cambridge, Massachusetts. My companies in the Bay Area needed to have their employees in the Bay Area. Then they all said, okay, we'll look at anybody, anywhere in the country. And a couple of things happened as a result of that. The first of which is they were seeing more qualified candidates in a shorter period of time because they're not focused on one particular geography. They're also seeing more qualified candidates potentially at a reasonably equal pay because they're looking in geographies where compensations are lower traditionally than where they're headquartered. Add that to the fact that the interview process is now virtual for everyone. And clocking in currently at the end of Q1, 90% of all of the interviews through True Staffing Partners are virtual, 90%, including final interviews where people are actually making hiring decisions. 90% in Q1 of this year were virtual. When you think about all that, what happened is now everything is moving really fast, like hyperbolically fast. Like Millennium Falcon, the stars are streaming into lines fast because they don't need to look at as many candidates. They're willing to hire everywhere. And their interview process no longer requires all these people to get together in an office who have busy schedules, who are all over the place. We get on a Zoom or a Teams or a Google Meet, and it all happens fast. Our placement life cycle for executives was 3 to 6 months for a CPO prior to the pandemic. Post-pandemic, it's 3 to 6 weeks. Our average is about 5 weeks. And for like program managers and analysts, it's 3 to 6 days. Used to be 3 to 6 weeks. 3 to 6 days. For contractors, sometimes it's 24 to 48 hours. That's how fast this market is moving. And so there isn't a lot of geographic preference right now. Right now, it's best candidate wins. And so that's why now is the absolute best time to be looking for a job. There's more opportunity, more flexibility from hiring managers than there has ever been in my life on this earth. And so a lot of people are saying, oh, it's the pandemic, I shouldn't be looking around, maybe I should just wait. I worry that, opportunity may pass you by because things are happening at really rapid pace right now and at unprecedented volume. Because in addition to everything I just told you, there's also been a levee building that has broken, right, because of the pandemic. And so in addition to all this contract hiring, which is already starting in the fourth quarter, now you have just massive amounts of headcount approval at the corporate level coming out of Q1. And so lots of full-time jobs, particularly in privacy, have been approved and people are going to market very quickly. When a whole wave gets hired, there's a whole wave of new jobs available. And that musical chairs doesn't really stop because we're not really taking away any chairs right now in privacy. In fact, we're adding chairs. So there's more people going around and then they all sit down and there's a chair for everybody. So it's a great time to be looking for a job in data privacy, particularly in the United States, because there's just more volume here than I've ever seen in my life. Now, flash forward.
Do I understand well that in the US, people are also open to hire from the Europe, from Brazil, or say South America, or even Asia? Is that true?
I mean, a lot of these companies have to, right? Because of data protection laws, they need their people regionalized and localized. And I would say companies that are in our portfolio that are major corporations with offices all over the world in these places generally want people there, right?
That
If
makes
you're
sense.
going to hire and have a person in China, you want them in China.
Yeah.
If you're going to have an office in London, you're hiring someone out of London. But that's not everybody, right? There are a lot of companies that are looking for professionals, specifically bilingual or trilingual professionals who are US based, who understand laws like what's happening in Brazil right now, or what's happening throughout Canada, that can come work for them stateside. But that goes the other way too. There are people in Europe that are headquartered in Europe that want people there that know what's happening in the US and have to deal with CCPA and CPRA and all of that. So it's, you are advantaged, but you are not blocked out from those opportunities if you're not in country.
Yeah. Earlier, you mentioned that there is a way difference, and I heard that and I've observed that as well because I worked for an American company and a European company. So yes, there's a huge difference in way an American company approaches privacy versus a European company approaches. But what do you see as the key difference? Because you are on the, if I may call it, an outside in, and you see all the things as an observer rather than as a privacy professional. You're a privacy observer. How do you see, what difference do you see between the US approach, the American approach, and the European approach?
Yeah, it's fascinating because people always ask me, like, what makes you a privacy expert? And I say, well, I have conversations with all the people that do this all day long, and get to hear all these different perspectives. And I would say this, I think in the United States, and I used the word weaponize before, maybe ironically, but here in the United States, people are less concerned about fines and much more concerned about customer trust.
Yeah.
And, it's interesting, right? You think about in Europe where a lot of privacy law, particularly GDPR law, really came out of what happened during, World War II and the Burgermeisters and trying to, punch card systems and trying to prevent the collection of data for the use of ethnic cleansing and genocide, right? A lot of GDPR law comes from the hyperbole example, which is a real one, which really happened, right? And yet European law, penalizes a corporation and makes them pay the government. I mean, that's how it goes, right? You pay a fine to the government. Here in the States, it's very different, where we're moving towards a culture, hopefully, where the penalty is against the individual, right? Yep. And so the remediation should come to that individual. And the potential damage, when you think about like a Henrietta Lacks story, right? The quintessential, breach of data privacy of someone's genetics, particularly of a Black African American woman's genetics, as being the worst case scenario in a lot of people's eyes here in the United States, or the Tuskegee Airmen experimentations, things like that, where you're dealing with privacy as an issue of civil rights and civil liberties. I think that's what corporations are really afraid of. And I think the way that they're going to curb that is to educate, incorporate, and move to transparency. And these sound simple, but man, I think they're really hard when you start really thinking about every single human being on the planet taking an active participation in the regulation of their own data. Because that's really what we're talking about here in the States, right? We want you as an individual to be the regulator. And in Europe, they don't really take that stance. It's an assumed human right. And we assume that the corporations are the ones that are going to take advantage of it. Here in the States, we assume it's the government that's going to take advantage of it. And we're actually pretty comfortable giving corporations all of our data. So now corporations have to be the moral center, not the government. And if that's the case, that's a tremendous amount of advertising, evangelizing, education, committing as a company to first educating all your internal employees and then all your customer base about what your rights are and then how to control them. This is going to take hundreds of thousands of people.
Absolutely. And then if it's going to take hundreds and thousands of people, what would make a good professional, good privacy professional, to be more specific? Because there are different types of profiles which are in demand. Sometimes they need people who need business. Sometimes they need people who can work with the C-level. Sometimes they need the technical people, and sometimes they need the pure legal professional who can defend things. So what kind of profiles and what would make a good privacy professional in the current situation?
So I'm going to answer that the way my good friend Uta Williams would want me to answer. She works at Twitter. At the core, a great privacy professional cares not about what you can do with data, but about what you should do with data. And I think if you're passionate about that premise, you make for a good privacy professional. Let's start there, right? Let's just start there, because I think that the discipline and the industry has the opportunity to be big enough and inclusive enough of people who just start there. So if we all start there and ask ourselves that question, like, yeah, I'm somebody who cares about what we should do with data, not what we can do with data. Now, what's next? Well, now you got a million different ways to approach the problem, right? You've got technologists, you've got the legal and the lawyering, you've got the administrative side, you've got, the operational, you've got tactical, you've got strategy, you've got advertising, you've got human rights, you've got the job, like the hiring process is a whole segmentation of collection of data and privacy awareness. I mean, there's just so many different ways. And, one of my employees, who's amazing, she's our director of recruitment, Jess Barr, wrote a great article that just got published in CPO magazine that's essentially saying the future general counsels of America are going to be the former chief privacy officers of America, because who else in the legal department has to work with every single piece of the business and win trust as the lawyer, right? Who everyone thinks you're going to be the no person, right? Like that's what most people inside corporations think, like legal is here to say no, but privacy is not a no business. Privacy is a constant negotiation and well, here's what we can do, but what should we do?
Yeah.
And so that's why I think that's what makes a great privacy professional. I think somebody that's passionate about that can find their way.
Yeah. And I think that's the challenge we also see when we're talking to some of the privacy professionals. It's not about, because people perceive you can't do things. It's not about what you cannot do. It's about how you can do things and what are the conditions for doing that. And then the question is not, can you do it? The question is it ethical? Is it the right thing to do? Would it give you the trust of the customer, or would it take the trust away? And that's where the debate is. Debate is not whether the law allows it or not.
Yeah, it's a risk conversation.
It's a risk conversation.
Like all great things in business, it's a risk conversation. And I think we have a long way to go to both make sure all of our C-level executives are educated properly about the risks surrounding privacy and they understand what those risks are, but then also, and we don't talk about this enough, what the opportunities are, because there are a lot of them and it's not bad to collect data, right? We have to get the John Q. public out of the mindset that data collection is bad and Big Brother is watching. We're way past that. They've got the data. Now we need to worry about what they're going to do with it. And we all have to be our own regulators to some extent.
Yeah, I think that stick approach worked for some time when GDPR was coming, but now it's the carrot. Now it's the customer trust. Now it's the cost of not complying when a customer files a lawsuit, and the cost of the data breach. Those are the things which people are realizing. It's a reputational risk rather than the fines risk. Fines they will pay, but the reputation is what they will not get back.
Well, and I'll offer this. What I'm finding now that's been so rewarding, particularly in the last 6 months, is corporations understand that they don't want to be ill-prepared for when these problems come their way, because just like cybersecurity, and I think people give too much attention to security breach, right? Breach, right? Oh, the end of days when you get breached. Well, everyone's going to get breached. We all know you're going to get breached. It's not about whether or not you're going to get breached. It's what you're going to do once you are breached. So it's the same thing with privacy, right? Let's put the same importance onto what are we doing around our privacy programs to get ahead of a breach, because in privacy, it's not so black and white. I mean, yeah, there are incidents, but there are much more subtle nuances around the origination of the complaint than there are around clear penetrations in your network.
Absolutely. I'm amazed with your knowledge and depth of privacy, even though you are just a recruiter. That's how I perceived you, but now I realize it. Of course, I saw your interview with IAPP, and that's when I said, this guy is not just a recruiter, but you have much more than it's the kind of question I ask, not the knowledge issue. It's a question issue.
That's flattering. Yes. I mean, look, we try to not just be recruiters because we really care about this community, you know, and we chose this community. We don't do a lot. We do very specific things. We represent very specific kinds of people and opportunities. And you know, my heart is connected with the work that we do and the people we represent. I think this is a really important, critical component to who we are as a species. And I'll say it because I think it is about that. I mean, like, you know, I'm a big sci-fi fan. I watch The 100 and it's a silly show. But, you know, at the end of days, it's essentially just the collection of their data reliving itself. And so if that's the pathway we're headed, where artificial intelligence and the perpetuation of self is in our data, then we better start paying attention to what we do with our data and how we share with it and who we have access to. So
absolutely. And I think I can vouch for the passion you have for privacy. So make no mistake, you have passion for privacy like anyone else, or better than anyone else. So what would you recommend somebody who's looking to start a career in privacy, or maybe somebody who's in college or just passing out of college, or kind of there are people on the periphery like, I'm looking for a change, I'm not happy, and they're looking to get into privacy. So what do they need to do? Do they need to worry about the experience, because there are not too many experienced people anyhow? So what is your recommendation, someone looking to start a career in privacy?
I mean, look, it's a shameless plug, but it's a genuine one. You go get your IAPP certifications. They're the gold standard. They have great programs. They're affordable. The people who work there are warm and welcoming. They have a great culture that perpetuates throughout the entire community. They set the tone for, I think, the culture around privacy as a profession. And it's all a really good and positive one. And they're very good people over there. And I think from a hiring perspective, somebody who's got zero experience and has never applied the knowledge that they've learned from that program will gain credibility with a potential employer for having done that program. And I'll say this, employers invest in people who invest in themselves. So start there. If you've already gone through what I'll call like the curiosity phase, the intellectual curiosity phase, which is really what needs to happen first, you know, you should be Googling a lot of the things I probably referenced in this interview if you don't know what they are, which is great, because all that stuff you can find on the internet, and develop a hunger and thirst for wanting to be part of the industry and the profession and the community. And then I go right to the IAPP, step one.
Good. That's a fair enough. I think I fully share. I've been on the board of IAPP, the Training Advisory Board, and they're wonderful people and with wonderful intentions. And the certifications are the only ones that are worth it. There are others, but they're not at that level and not well recognized, or not so much recognized as the IAPP ones are.
Well, I can only comment and say on what I think tips the scale meaningfully for most hiring managers. And you are correct in saying that there is no other certification other than the IAPPs that holds uniform and universal acceptance from hiring managers when it comes to distinguishing talent. That's accurate.
Yeah. And again, there are certifications coming up, but for them to reach the level that IAPP is offering, the standardization, the acceptability, I think it will take time. There's some way to go.
Well, look, we need nuance. We don't need someone to compete with the IAPP. We need nuance, right? And we're going to need vocational certifications like OneTrust, like TrustArc. I mean, we're getting to that point now where programmatic responsibilities are compartmentalized enough that someone who hasn't gotten their IAP certifications, but has gotten their OneTrust certifications and can wield the tool, can also be very effective in getting employment or in breaking into the industry. So, we need more diversified things. I think we need some stronger, more widely accepted healthcare privacy certifications. Yeah. I know the IAPP is working on that and has developed stuff like that, but it's not perpetuated far enough that it is as universally accepted as, say, a CIPP US or E or something like that. And that's what we need, because privacy is getting more nuance. And we need to embrace specialization as the industry expands, because that specialization will create opportunity and ultimately jobs.
Sure. So now, if somebody thinks that they want to be hired and they want to contact you, or they want to contact you for changing a job or something, maybe an opinion or something. So can you tell them a little bit about True Staffing Partners? What do you do, and how can they reach out to you or your team so that they can get to the next level where they're looking at?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would preface all of this by saying you don't have to need to be looking for a job today to reach out to us for representation. The approach that my organization takes, and that I've always taken in my career, is, agent for life. And our goal as a business is to know everyone in the entire privacy industry. An impossible goal we will never achieve, but it's good to have goals that are unreachable, I think, sometimes. So we encourage people to reach out to us anytime, just for guidance or wisdom or advice, or I'm thinking about making a move someday, but not right now, and I want to know a little bit about what to anticipate. All of these are great reasons to reach out to us, as much as I need a job now. The best way to find us is on our website, which is truestaffingpartners.com. That's TRU staffingpartners.com. But we're all over LinkedIn. All of my agents are readily available. You can find us on LinkedIn. We're pretty widely published, both by the IAPP and by Legal Technology News and Inc. and a bunch of other resources. So if you're looking for content, original content, you can subscribe to all of that on our LinkedIn homepage. Love to hear from people from all over the world. We get job orders from all over the world.
Absolutely. And I think you tempt me to send my CV as well, because I'm not sure if I put it to staffing partners.
Well, it would be my pleasure to work with you in any capacity, right? If you're looking to hire people too, we're also a great resource to call. We've got, plenty of bandwidth to help more people fill their open positions.
For sure. I think the philosophy is what I'm pleased with. Of course, your passion, and then the philosophy that it's not about you're looking for a job. It's about being in a system, in a philosophy that, yes, I'm here and let's stay in touch, and who knows what pops up. So it's not like when you're looking for a job contact, just be in touch, just connect.
Yeah. I mean, it's like any good relationship you would have with, anyone that you work with. Yep. You don't want to get to know an agent when you need them most. You want to have a relationship with somebody so that when you do need them most, there's understanding and, of culture, of fit, of style, and, there's trust built. I mean, look, I didn't name my company what I named it on accident. The first 5 letters are TRUST, right? This is intentional, because I live by a philosophy that representation is about trust. And my success has been built on thousands and thousands of people saying, I trust this guy and I trust all the people that work for them. They've got the right intentions and they're looking to make the right marriages between companies and individuals. And that's why privacy has just been such a natural fit for us culturally, because privacy is all about trust too.
I can certainly say that you are about trust, and you have, it was your trust that prompted me to connect with you and ask for an interview. So it was wonderful to have you. I mean, great thoughts, full of passion, full of energy, and a philosophy which stands apart from others I've talked about in this context of staffing and recruitment. So thank you so much, Jared, and have a great time.
Thank you so much for having me. Absolute pleasure.
Thanks for listening, and now we ask you for some help. Take a moment to subscribe and review this podcast. Your support matters. And if you have done it already, thank you so much. Now, if you have questions or suggestions, drop an email at hello@fit4privacy.com. And finally, if you know someone who will benefit from this, share this podcast with them and help us grow. Thank you so much. Stay safe and see you next time.